Dear chess friends, welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome to another brilliant and spectacular game with a great theoretical value. Welcome to an amazing gameplay by Equisetum against the most powerful chess engine in the world against Stockfish 17 in a crazy Rapport-Jobava system. And the Rapport-Jobava system, or the Jobava Rapport system, or the Jobava-London system, it's also called, it's really one of the most annoying systems that you can face when you play with the black pieces, because your opponent will get many times a similar position, a solid position in the early stage of the game, and you cannot really counterplay it immediately. You cannot really go into an aggressive line against this opening in the early stage of the opening stage. So you have to be calm. You have to first find yourself a good setup against the Rapport-Jobava system, and then afterwards you have to search for good squares, for good opportunities in the middle game stage. And that's exactly what happened, I think, in this game. First, as I mentioned, great theoretical value here by Stockfish with the black pieces, then amazing tactics all over the board, tactical sequences all over the board, and then also a spectacular endgame. So I think it's again sort of a game that has every stage covered. We don't want to, of course, many times just to see Stockfish destroying opponents in 25 moves and I don't know 30 moves. We really want to really see all of the stages of the chess game. So that's, I think, here an amazing game with every stage that we want to see in a spectacular chess game for sure. So let's see now what happened with the white pieces. The engine Equisetum opened with the move d4. Stockfish response was knight to f6, knight to c3, d5, battling immediately for the e4 square. And now here Equisetum plays the move bishop to f4, which becomes now the Rapport-Jobava system. And Stockfish goes into a calm line with the move e6, is preparing, of course, to hit here the queen side with the move c5. I myself, I'm a fan of this line, which is not allowing here black to go, pardon me, which is not allowing white here to immediately go into common line with knight to b5, then after e3, e6, and g4, which would be a really, I think, the most often played line now by white. Then you can go with bishop to b4 and battle for the e4 square. I've covered a couple of videos about the Rapport-Jobava system with the black pieces. You can also check them out, also with different sidelines, with different opportunities for both sides. So here, after move bishop to f4 and e6, that Stockfish played, even if knight to b5 happens now, then you have this resource knight to a6, and then eventually you will kick away the knight from the b5 square. So every line is possible, nothing wrong with all of these lines. I think they're playable for both sides. So here after move e6 that Stockfish played, Equisetum continued with the calm e3, and Stockfish continues now with bishop to b4 with the progressive idea to play knight to e4. Equisetum covers now the e4 square. We have now the move c5, d takes c5. We have knight to d7, hitting now immediately back the pawn on c5. Stockfish decides here that it won't simply stay longer with the spin against this knight, so it wants to recapture the pawn in a different way. Knight to e2 by white, and now a6, which is a very important move here by Stockfish. This move does several things. This move is preventing, after a couple more moves, not immediately, but is preventing a potential knight to b5, and then maybe a very dangerous move, knight to d6. But it also does something else. For instance, if white makes now a mistake with kingside castling, immediately, then there is this beauty. e5, you hit the bishop, and then e4 locks now the light square bishop out of the game, and I think white can resign after a couple more moves. So dirty, seemingly calm move here by Stockfish with the move a6. So that's why Equisetum retreats now with the bishop to g3. Stockfish plays bishop takes c5 finally, and now h3. Here, again, Stockfish reacts correctly. If you play e5 immediately, which many of us would do, seems tempting that you want to break the center with, I don't know, e4, or maybe if it's possible with d4, but this would be too rushed. Then here, after move e5, bishop to f5 is the opportunity, and now both of these pawns are weaknesses. This pawn on d5 is weak. This is also weakness. This bishop is attacking the knight here. So many options here for white for sure. And actually, white should be even slightly better in this position. So that's why after move h3, Stockfish didn't rush, played now a calm kingside castling also by Equisetum, and now a rook to e8. Now we can prepare finally this e5 goal. e4, that's why here by Equisetum. white doesn't want to tolerate any potential pawn mobility by black in the center of the board with this dominant 2 versus 1 situation, because we have now this 2 pawns against 1 pawn of whites in the center of the board. So that's why white is immediately challenging black's central control. b5 here by the fish, and now Equisetum continues with e5, expands now in the center of the board. If white would have played e takes d5, it seems tempting to go into this line, because maybe black could be left with an isolated d pawn, but actually, believe me or not, this is not such a big deal here for black. Even if you try knight to f4, then we can cover everything here. We can simply protect this pawn twice with the bishop and a knight. And if you maybe go for the e file, I just analyzed one line. I wanted to show you how misplaced, how not so well coordinated white's pieces are. Although, as we said, black has the isolated d pawn, which could be maybe a long-term weakness. But now after move g5, look at this, then you have to step back, then we play queen to e7, hit now the knight, and the knight doesn't have good squares to jump. You cannot jump here, you cannot jump here, you cannot jump, of course, on c1, then the queen is hanging, and even if you try, I don't know, knight to d1, look at this, you have to play very passive moves. Then we play a rook from a to e8, and suddenly it becomes a one-way ticket in black's favor. We take over on the e file. Maybe we still have this weakness, but this weakness on d5 can always be improved with potential knight to e4, cementing simply the center. This knight will come into the game, maybe knight to b6, knight to c4, or maybe knight to e5. I don't know. Many options. Although, as I said, you have this maybe tiny little weakness, but your pieces are well coordinated. So that's why after move b5 here that we said, taking the pawn here is not a big deal here for black to handle. So that's why here Equisetum expanded in the center of the board. Stockfish steps back, but very importantly here, attacks also the bishop on g3. We have now bishop to h2 with a threat to play g4 and trap the knight, because the knight is on the edge of the board. That's why the fish has to play g6. Knight to c1, we have bishop to b6, preparing now to hop with the knight on c5. Knight to b3, Equisetum prevents it. You look at this, white is also here playing really good chess, and we watch now Equisetum's rating. It's 3,645 rating points. It's really also a strong chess engine. Stockfish continues now with the development, and slowly but surely you can feel something is going on here. Stockfish built, I think, an amazing attacking formation, and has also a nice clarification in the center of the board, because nothing dynamic is going on now in the center of the board. So now the bishops are well placed. What we want to do is somehow get rid of this maybe e5 pawn, which is creating basically the main advantage in white's position, space advantage here in the center of the board. So Equisetum battles here immediately on the queen side, doesn't want to tolerate this expansion on this side of the board. Stockfish pushed through, Equisetum steps back, and now a beautiful counter attack here by the fish, bishop to c7, hitting now the very important e5 pawn. White protected, Stockfish continues to pressure. We have now f4, white cements now the position around the square e5, and now comes, I think, the first really beauty here in Stockfish game. Stockfish plays now a beautiful f6. Instead of maybe playing strange moves like a5, cementing then bishop to b5 could happen, and again this would be an unpleasant position, Stockfish simply says, go for the b4 pawn, but now I will somehow destroy you here on this side of the board. So after move f6, bishop to e2, good counterattack by Equisetum, because even if you try f takes e5, then we simply pick up the piece. We can take out now this one, and probably Stockfish evaluate this position maybe as risky here for black, although it is still maybe slightly better to play here this position for black. But I myself, I'm not really a fan also of this position, especially with such a weakened king. So good decision here after move bishop to e2 that Stockfish played. Pardon me, that Equisetum played. Stockfish plays now knight to g7. Here we have e takes f6, knight to f6, and knight takes b4. And okay, you see now in this sequence, Stockfish lost a pawn, but Stockfish, we know what Stockfish is doing. It always gives sometimes some kind of material, but then it has great attacking chances in the continuation of the game. So the fish continues with knight to e4. The knights of whites, we have to say, are a little bit misplaced, are simply too far away from the action, are not again well coordinated. Now black is hopping with the knight, has now the opportunity to play knight to f5, has the opportunity to maybe go for some weaknesses here, e3, g3. These are, I think, clear targets for white to attack. Knight to d3, we have now knight to f5, we have now here rook to f3, and now bishop to d8. Great maneuver of the fish here. Now Stockfish wants to shift it over and attack the queen and simply go for the g3 weakness. What should you do? If you try maybe g4 to kick away maybe this unpleasant knight from the square f5, then you get this counterattack. Knight to h4, you have to now step back with the rook, and in many of these lines you're getting simply destroyed. The queen is very active. Look at this. After a couple more moves, I think again white can simply resign. So this is not working. So after bishop to d8, Equisetum goes out of the potential dark square attack by the queen, and now Stockfish continues with the beautiful d4, and now Stockfish has the initiative. Stockfish suddenly has expanded in the center of the board, has again the beautiful coordination of the pieces. Bishop to h4 is probably coming in the next couple of moves. The queen, although a little bit misplaced on b8, still has always the flexibility to attack maybe some diagonals, so it becomes really nice again formation by the fish. So here knight to e4, e5 by Equisetum. Again, moves like g4 are not working because after bishop to h4, this is simply again losing game. There are always these threats to somehow play a discovered attack by this bishop against the rook on f3. So again, I would say completely winning position here for black. So that's why knight to e5 here by Equisetum. Stockfish continues now with bishop to h4 anyway. g3 here obviously is not working. You could maybe cover, but knight takes g3 again liberates the long diagonal. After a couple more moves, again white is losing decisive material. So the power of this bishop on b7 is really remarkable, and we know that this bishop on dark squares was good through the whole game. So now Stockfish create really a monstrous bishop pair all over the board. So that's why Equisetum tried queen to g1, tried to compete somehow, and now queen to d6. Good move by Stockfish because Stockfish realized that it could have problems around the square d4. Stockfish advanced, of course, the pawn just in order to liberate this diagonal, but now it becomes also a vulnerable square that white can attack. And you see Equisetum immediately attacks it, Stockfish protects it, and now c3. White is battling also somehow for the center with this dangerous d-file attack. And now comes another beautiful moment. Stockfish says, okay, you had your fun in the center of the board, now I'm going to reroute my queen, and there are still these threats. Knight to g3, knight to g3, and bishop takes f3 is always present in the game, and white has basically not so many chances to battle against this knight to g3 move. Probably in many of the sequences white will lose the exchange, but you want to lose the exchange in the most optimal way. So that's why there are many options here what white could do. For instance, I've analyzed this line at home. It seems like a tempting idea to play c takes d4, and now maybe knight from e to g3 you think is now good, but actually in this position it wouldn't be good for Stockfish to immediately go into this line. This is not so good because after rook takes g3, knight takes g3, bishop takes g3, and bishop takes g3, it seems so that maybe black is winning the game for sure because white is, black is up the exchange. But knight to f4, knight to c5, and then hitting the bishop here is very hard to handle now for black. You have to play bishop to d5, but then in a couple more moves this bishop is coming into the game. We can also temporarily protect this pawn on f4. So okay, you are up the exchange, but this is still, I would say, playable position for white. There is this problem of this pawn on a6 when suddenly two connected pass pawns are rolling on the queen side, and with such a great coordination finally of the knights in this sequence, you see white would have then finally the knights on good squares. it's not working. So, but still, as we mentioned, white could have played here the move c takes d4, but black doesn't have to play immediately knight to g3. This knight to g3 move, or knight from e to g3, is always a threat, but there is a different problem. If you play c takes d4 now, this wasn't played in the game. In the game, knight to a5 was played by Equisetum. But let's see, if you play c takes d4, there is another problem. Queen to b4. That's also the beauty about this move, queen to f8. The queen can jump all over the board. The queen can always be included in the game. And now you can maybe play bishop to c4. You trying somehow to hold this knight, but then look at this, knight to d6, simply attacking the bishop. You have to now protect it, and now after knight to c4, the issue is if you play rook takes c4, then you lose the knight. If you play knight takes c4, then bishop to d5, then this bishop is such a great piece. You have to play moves like knight to d2, but now bishop to f6. Look, black would simply continue the attacking flow. You have to play maybe something like this, bishop to knight to e5, but then this pawn is lost. And look at this, such a beautiful attacking harmony. This rook is hanging. This pawn is a weakness, a long-term weakness. There are several threats. We can always occupy some files. So obviously, I think again, completely winning position for black. So see, after move queen to f8, a brilliant move that Stockfish played. It's not allowing here white to pick up the pawn on d4 immediately. I think it's a critical moment. That's why I took my time also to analyze this very important moment. That's why here you see knight to a5. Here Equisetum doesn't want to tolerate this very unpleasant bishop on b7. Stockfish retreats, but of course keeps the action on the long diagonal. Knight from a to c6, locking out now this diagonal, but now Stockfish continues the pressure. Rook to d6, and now another important moment, how to take maybe the pawn on d4 here. Obviously, the d4 pawn is weak, so with which piece should we take it? If you, for instance, try knight takes d4, it seems, again, like a tempting idea to finally fix your position. Then, finally, this motif with knight to g3 is working, because after bishop to g3, knight to g3 check. Then the issue is after bishop to f3, knight to f3, we can pick up this one. And it's a different story now. It's not the same position like we have seen previously. In the previous line that we have discussed, there was this line where white could have simply protected the pawn on f4, and this is obviously completely winning again here for black. So that's why for rook to d6, Equisetum says, okay, I will lose the exchange, but I'll lose it in a different way. Rook to d4, but now again a brilliant move here by Stockfish, because you cannot play knight takes d4. After knight takes d4 and knight takes d4, knight to g3 is not such a good position, because here simply we can simply grab it, and after rook to g3, look at this, you should play bishop to g3, and I think white has survived. White has now great continuation, has now four minor pieces against two rooks and one minor piece. The knights are well placed. This pawn on f4 is again protected. This bishop will eventually come into the game. So I think again, beautiful position here to play for white. So that's why after rook to d6 and rook to d4, Stockfish took with the rook takes d4, knight to d4, only good move here for Equisetum, because if you play c takes d4, the issue is now that the bishop is loose here on e2. So that's why after knight to g3, look at this, we will also grab now this one. So that's why Equisetum had to protect it now with knight to d4. Stockfish continues now finally with the threat that was present now for many moves, but now it's time to strike with knight to g3, knight takes g3, knight takes g3, rook takes g3, bishop takes g3. We have now bishop to a6. Equisetum calculated that it's finally time to grab some pawns here on this side of the board, and Equisetum of course realized that it could have here some kind of an expansion on the queen side, because there are three connected passports. But okay, Stockfish plays queen takes f4, grabs now very important pawn. We have bishop to b5, rook to d8, an attack against the knight. The issue is now knight takes e6 is not working here. Look how crazy these tactics are that Stockfish is preparing. Knight takes e6 seems tempting, but then you get bishop takes g2. Bam! This would be then a winning game then for black. If you play queen takes g2, then the rook is coming, you have to cover, and then there is a beautiful check. The same thing happens if you play king takes g2 after bishop to g2, then again a new check, again with the same problems. Here queen to e4, and it's game over here for white. Stunning ideas that actually here rook to d8 is working. No time to pick up here on the pawn on e6. Knight from e to f3. That's why here by Equisetum, Stockfish centralizes the bishop. Bishop to c6. Bishop takes, knight takes, and now the rook is coming in a beautiful way into the game. Knight to b4, rook to d7. We have now a5. Equisetum is now finally pushing the pawns on the queen side. Stockfish plays now a counterattack, a must move, the only good move here for black to proceed in order to somehow mess up a little bit the structure in front of white's king. We have now a6, white is marching, g4, we have a7. The issues you cannot take, of course, the queen is still protecting this pawn, so Equisetum is hoping to get something with this pawn. Stockfish has to now play a passive move, queen to f8, and now knight to g5. A good move, because even if you try knight to d4, maybe to lock the d file, then the issue is we will simply take, and the knight disconnects, of course, the connection of the queen to the pawn on a7. So that's why after queen to f8, knight to g5 must move. Stockfish plays now very important here. Queen to a8, knight to a6. The issue is again knight to e6. Here it's not working because of this line. G takes h3, and you cannot take, obviously, because of the queen's activity against the king. You could maybe try knight to d4, but then we pick up this one. There are several threats. h2, rook to a1. You could maybe survive with knight to c2, but then we centralize the queen. We get the rook on maybe on the second rank, and obviously white is again busted. So great position for sure here for black. After queen to a8, that's why Equisetum tried knight to a6. Stockfish took. Here white takes also the pawn on h3, and now finally this pawn is taken, and this is now at least something that black can of course hope for, because this pawn is very annoying. Still, white has two connected pass pawns, so it's not over, although the evaluation is almost +3 for black, in black's favor. But I guarantee you many of us would not win this game with the black pieces for sure. I messed up many times position where I had even +5 +6 evaluations because you don't know how to make really the best moves in this rare endgames. I think this kind of an endgame is not happening to us many times when you play our own chess game. So knight to c5, Equisetum is battling. We have now rook to d5, knight takes e6. You see white grabbed another pawn. Stockfish continues now with the trades of queens, but now paralyzes the knight to the king, and the king is simply out of game, but also the knight is neutralized on g1. Knight to d4, Stockfish continues to pressure. b4, we have now a further expansion on the king side. Knight to e2, and now rook to b1. And what should you do? The issue is now, if you play here knight takes g3 immediately, then after h takes g3, again your pieces are all of game, and you could maybe push the pawns, but then we pick up simply this one, and after this one we can simply protect it or deliver a new check. Here you deliver a new check again. White is forced to step back, and then you go for this pawn. So there is always this pattern that bothers now here white in the continuation of the game. Even if you try after rook to b1 to play moves like knight to d4, you could maybe try, I don't know, to somehow support your progress of the pawns on the queen side. It's not working because black will simply get the king closer. And one moment when the king is coming closer, you have to push some pawns, and then when we pick up one pawn, the other is also falling. So no way that white can simply start to push pawns. So what white is basically hoping for is, I think, here to somehow squeeze a draw out of this position. After rook to b1, that's why c4 by Equisetum. Stockfish grabs now pawn. Now white pushes this one, and again Stockfish goes for this plan with rook to b1. c6, we have now king to f7. This was a brilliant move by the fish. It seems so that this is not a spectacular move or something. that it's not doing anything. But actually, look at this. This move is preventing a potential knight takes g3. Because after h takes g3 and maybe the move c7, black would be forced to go with this rook like this, and then when we take it out, then after potential knight to e2, you still have time to protect your pawn with your rook. So that's why it was very important to play this clearance to allow your rook to get on the 8th rank and then support your potential pawn on g3. Very, very important endgame move here by the fish. So that's why Equisetum tried c7. Pardon me. Bishop to c7, obviously played by Stockfish. G3. We have now h takes g3, and now finally white liberates the king and hopes to get this pawn, and hopes after potential trades around the square g3 to reach a rook versus knight endgame, which could be, of course, a drawish position. But Stockfish is battling rook to b2, king to h3, now bishop to b6. Here Equisetum takes, and Stockfish allows here this pawn to be taken, but now Stockfish goes active with the king. We have really an interesting endgame position here by these two top engines. King to f4. We have rook to b4, king to f3. Stockfish is getting closer, but obviously with this good knight, Equisetum is battling somehow. We have knight to e2, rook to b3, new check. Stockfish is again keeping the rook on the 3rd rank, and now keeps now the pieces far away from the knights, where the pieces cannot be attacked by the knights. But of course, the rook and the bishop are long range pieces, so they keep their activity, but not vulnerable, of course, to the attack by the knights. Knight to e2, we have rook to d3, king to f1, new check. Stockfish retreats now to d8, knight to c3, and now king to g4. Again, a new check here by Equisetum. Stockfish gets the king closer, knight from f to d5, and now Stockfish goes again with an attack against the knight. We have knight to b4, we have rook to c8, knight to b5. But even if you try knight to e2, then king to e4, again the king will get closer to the action. So maybe this was a way to survive the game for a little bit longer. But knight to b5 here by Equisetum. Stockfish continues with bishop to c5, knight to d3. We have now king to e4, and if you play knight to c5, the issue is that actually the knight here is simply out of game. So you could maybe try knight to a3 to escape, but then once this knight gets cornered, once this knight doesn't have any good squares, it will be obviously grabbed and it will be taken. So it's simply not working. So after king to f4, king to e4, we have knight to f2, king to e3. Here Equisetum delivers new checks. Stockfish centralizes again the king, but now finally the knight gets pinned. What should you do? If you try king to g3, then obviously this one is winning, and then we pick up this one. And here in this position, king to h3 was played, but now Stockfish gets the king closer. A new attack by the knight. Stockfish delivers a check. Here Equisetum retreats, and now king to f3. White is desperately trying to get some pieces into the game, but now the killer move is rook to g6 with the threat of rook to h6 checkmate, because if you try something like knight to d5, then this is immediately a checkmate because this square is taken by the bishop. So after rook to g6, knight to h5, now this knight gets pinned, and now after rook to h5, it was again the same checkmate pattern. So after 87 moves of brilliant chess, Stockfish won its game with the black pieces against the Jobava rapport system. Amazing stuff that we have seen here. I think from the beginning, great opening theory, great tactics, also the pawn sacrifice in the middle game stage where Stockfish found good activities. Amazing chess game here by the most powerful chess engine in the world. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see some other spectacular games and studies about the Rapport-Jobava system, check out my coverage. Here's the link to the playlist. And if you want to see some other spectacular games played by the most powerful chess engine in the world by Stockfish, check out our the chess games played by computers. Here's also the link to the series. And if you like this content, hit the subscribe button. See you soon with some more videos. And what do we say in the end? Chess is the best, of course.